on to the item 5, which is a 5-year plan, and there's presenting. Well, that's a lie, because I'm not going to present it, or am I? So are you going to kick this off, Jackie, in terms of the 5-year plan? This is a special meeting to deal with a 5-year plan that needs to go to the CA board, and it's extremely important. WSP have done a massive amount of work in it, as indeed have Jackie and team. And it really is the denouement of a lot of things that have got to happen now if we're to meet the hashtag 2041 targets. So that's what it's about. It's flesh on bones of action plans, or really 5-year plans. And Jackie, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Courts. And first of all, thank you for your time, everybody, this afternoon, and for the time you've put in while we've been building the plan. We've spoken to all of you as part of the process, and your feedback and input has been really valuable to us. So myself and Barney will be taking you through the slides that we've already circulated, just to receive your input and your feedback. It's still a draft version. There will be a long form document accompanying it that we're just finalising now. So the way we were planning to run the session today is we'll go through sections of it and we'll pause and take feedback and comments. And we'll have to maintain some pace because, as you'll have seen from the papers, there's quite a lot of slides that form part of this document. But we'll whiz through some of the backgrounds that I think a lot of you are familiar with before we get into the modelling, which is probably where there will be more questions. I think before we start, there's 5 key points that I want to pull out. The first is that we're treating this work from WSP as an independent report that sets out options for pathways and trajectories for us to get to net zero. So I think that's really important. We're taking it as independent feedback from them on what we need to do as part of the first 5-year plan, bearing in mind the long-term target of 2041. The reason that we're breaking it down into 4 5-year plans is obviously there will be changes in policy, regulation, financing, and technology that could change our trajectory significantly. So the fact that we're doing it 5 years at a time means that after 5 years we can pause and think, can we do some bits faster? Are there other areas where we need to focus effort? And we'll be reviewing the plan annually as we go forward to model and monitor our progress. At this point in time, and you'll see from the overarching paper, we're recommending the accelerated pathway, and Barney will talk a bit more about that as we go through the slides, because that's based on what's possible in terms of technology and policy, but also in terms of the just transition to net zero. So what is both socially acceptable and what will enable everybody in the West Midlands to be part of the journey towards net zero. And as we go through these slides, you'll see there are really significant opportunities, economic opportunities, social opportunities, job opportunities, and we'll elaborate on some of those as we move through. It's a plan for the West Midlands Combined Authority, but also for the West Midlands region as a whole. We consulted extensively on the original Green Paper on WM 2041, and as part of this work, WSP have spoken to 240 people in 97 different organisations, including all the local authorities, to help us build something collectively that we feel the region will be able to own, and that will be an important part of the delivery of this plan as we go forward. And the final thing is, it is a carbon plan, so we completely appreciate the need to build in, as part of the delivery, behaviour change, business engagement, and also the fact that it will sit in a context of wider work around, for example, natural capital, our work on resources, particularly in relation to the circular economy, that might not be explicitly mentioned throughout this document, but it sits as part of a range of activities that we'll be doing as a combined authority on the environment. So I think they're the main things that I wanted to pull out. And then the final thing, which is a bit more superficial, is the whole thing will be going through WSP's graphic designers. So please bear in mind, if there's anything where you think the presentation of some of this work could make more sense if it's done in a different way, then please let us know that as well as we take you through the draft document. So Barney, if we could move on to the next slide. This is the context and the structure of the document that you've got. We're not going to dwell on the summary of the summary. We're going to move straight to the background because many of those issues are picked up through the slides as we go forward. And Barney and I will take you through different sections. So probably, Barney, if we go straight to the background slide, you do have all these in your pack. So if there are any questions, do ask. So next slide, Barney. You'll all be familiar with WM 2041. This is the cover of the document that went to the CA board in January last year. And it was in the consultation around this particular document that the message came through loud and clear that we should be producing action plans to help break this long-term target. Should plans where we could build an investment case and look at the very particular actions that need to be taken forward to deliver our climate change work with 2041 in mind. So if we go to the next slide. We were also really clear that there were some key underlying goals and principles that needed to underpin all our work on climate change that speak to the wider social and economic context that we're working in. I've already mentioned a couple of these. So, for example, the transition should not leave anybody behind. It needs to be a transition that everybody can feel part of, that every business can engage with, and that there are opportunities for all of us. It's about creating places, it's about how we use resources, it's about recognising the industrial past of the West Midlands and thinking about what addressing climate change means here and for our region, as well as thinking about resilience and adaptation to the climate change that we are already seeing day to day. So if we could go to the next slide, Barney. And as part of that, we're also aligning with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that pick up on many of these co-benefits around addressing inequalities, around skills, community ownership. And what we've done as we've thought about the delivery plans that will need to sit alongside this 5-year plan, we thought about how each of those things address some of the sustainable development goals and which ones are relevant, particularly as part of our work on inclusive growth. So we see that work around co-benefits as being really critical to the delivery of WM 2041. If we could go to the next slide, Barney. And so this is what the first 5-year plan is aiming to do. And you'll have seen this slide before because we've shared it at the previous Environment Board meetings. We're looking at building an evidence-based spatial plan, so recognising there is already a lot of work happening across the region and understanding what that is. We're looking at building a common vision for all our stakeholders so that there is something that we can collectively work towards. We are looking at different existing and potential new routes to delivery. So delivery is a really key part of this plan. We've outlined a number of goals, but also put a lot of thought into how we're going to deliver them, who needs to be involved, and the fourth point there, the financing and investment that will be required to make it happen. And the first 5-year plan aims to be a real step change. So in his opening, Councillor Courts talked about the need to accelerate the work and the scale of the challenge, as well as the opportunity in addressing climate change and delivering 2041. OK, Barney, next slide, please. OK, so I'll pause there. Are there any questions already, or shall I carry on? Anything popped up in the chat? See my chat pinging away. Yes, Councillor Fowler.
Councillor Fowler's got his hand up, yeah. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. as a member of the scrutiny committee, one thing that I wouldn't say I find alarming, but needs to ensure that we are together, is that being in full council at the Birmingham City Council, I do remember there was talk about from Councillor Zaffa. I think he was saying that we, as the combined authority, are a bit behind their plans. And the reason why I'm commenting on that is we have said through the chair on many times how we need to ensure that we are syncing with national government, with the combined authority, down to the council and other local authorities. I'm getting the impression that that is not quite syncing. So we will be naturally out of sync, Chair, and that does concern me.
Okay. I mean, in terms of being behind or forward, I mean, there are different dates that are involved. I mean, different councils have different dates, and you know, I mean, in Solihull we've tried to link with the CA dates on 2041, although we have a 2030 for council operations. I'm just a bit puzzled if there's any suggestion that we're behind others. I actually get the impression that you know, we are very much leading the way with cooperation from all of our constituents. Ian, Councillor Kettle's got his hand up. Ian? On mute at the moment. Ian, you're on mute.
Forgive me, I'm just looking at the slide, but one aspect that I think we need to take care of very early on in this plan, and that is that the technical advances that are now so important to us, they need to be spread more amongst the population. And I put down here, knowledge overcomes fear, and the reticence to accept what is needed and what is going to happen from many in the population comes from the lack of knowledge that what is possible. Do I make a fair point?
Yeah, I think it is. I think there's a lack of knowledge. I think there's also a lack of understanding as what people can do. I mean, an important part and parcel of this plan is the behavioural change issue, and I've had many discussions, even discussions today with Jackie and Ed about you know, it's taking people on, it's what can they do, it's a contribution that individuals can make. So I think you're absolutely right. We need people on this journey with us, because I think there's an awful lot individuals can do. I mean, certainly I suppose you'd call it the circular economy, but reduction of waste. There's loads of things that can be done there. On the technology, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think it will be technology that solves this problem more than anything else. And the more we can encourage technology and people to pick up technology, the better. Right, I'm going to just go around. I think Councillor Zaffa, Wasim, you got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to come back to some of the comments that Councillor Fowler made, but Birmingham does have a target for 2030, and obviously this plan is 2041, and the government's plan is 2050. But I think the key thing is if, as a region, we get the resources to deliver this plan. There's some things that we can do in terms of developing technology, as you've just said. There's some things we could do with behaviour change. But things like retrofit, whether it's retrofit housing, retrofit of buildings, we absolutely need the right level of resources from government to be devolved down to the region, and then devolved down to the constituent members of the combined authority to deliver that. Without the resources, we're not going to be able to get anywhere near whether it's 2050, 2041 or 2030 for that matter. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, okay. Well, I would agree with all that. I mean, in terms of the dates, I mean, Councillor Zaffa, we've had discussions about this. I mean, you're on your own action plan to meet those dates. I mean, I think we picked 2041 in the CA based on Tyndall report, and as it was seen to be, I mean, not everybody in the CA is even at 2041. So I think we can we can choose dates, but it's the action plan, the resources that go into it that's key, isn't it? So yeah, okay. I think I'm out of yellow hands on the screen at the moment. So unless I see another one there, but I have just seen Barbara. You were on and then you're off again. So Barbara, are you coming in?
Thank you. Yes, please. We have, sticking with the theme of behavioural change, we have the Climate Change Advisory Group, and we've decided to make that public in the near future. And I think that's a good way of keeping the public involved with what's going on, and also to take them along the same journey. So that might be another thought. Thank you.
Yeah, run with that. Indeed, I think one of the plan talks about the citizens. It's not forums, is it? Or is it maybe Jackie? But I know there's a reference to engagement like that. But I think we all have our role to do in telling people what we're doing, and particularly actions. Okay, thank you, Barbara. Great stuff.
Thank you.
Jackie, are you going to
Yes,
pick up now?
I will do. So I won't spend much time on these. These are in your slide packs. But what we've done is we have outlined where we are now. So these are purely quantifying in very descriptive terms, things like the population, some of the challenges that we have, for example, around fuel poverty, the number of businesses in the region, the number of cars we have. And then it goes on to the next slide that also talks about things like our share of greenhouse gas emissions and some of the things that are already happening. So, for example, the projected decarbonisation of electricity. So this is just to provide some context of where we are now that feed into the overall picture. Okay, next slide, Barney. I'm handing over to you now for the next few.
You are. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see everyone again. I think we've all met before. So the scope is important to explain the scope of the emissions that are included within the 5-year plan, what aren't included within the 5-year plan. So the way this works at a regional level is data is available on what's called the subnational level. And so we take data on the 4 main fuel categories that are used in the region. So it's natural gas, electricity, road transport fuel, and residual, which is things like oil and things that quite small amounts used. This differs from how you might treat organisations. So those of you be familiar with scope 1, 2 and 3 approaches, it's not the same. In some ways, I'd say it's better because it's more all-encompassing. It captures the actual sources of the emissions, but it does mean that, for example, tomatoes from Spain aren't included in the calculation. There are also other emissions around refrigerant gases, for example, and waste emissions from waste aren't included as well. So I appreciate we can sort of debate whether they should be or shouldn't be, but just wanted to be clear on where what is and what isn't included. So just a bit of background. So in terms of the combined authority area, the consumption is about 50,000 gigawatt hours of energy per annum, and it's fallen about 20% since 2005, which would be broadly in line with the rest of the country. There's been a similar combination of probably deindustrialisation and energy efficiency, fundamentally. A split between domestic, commercial and transport, not fairly equal thirds of the pie, and with most of the energy still natural gas. Looked at through the lens of greenhouse gas emissions. Sorry, I've gone too fast. It's a similar story. So the combined emissions are just over 11 megatons per annum now for the region. It's fallen about 36% since 2005, which is again broadly in line with the rest of the country, maybe a little bit faster, and again a fairly equal split between domestic, commercial, and transport. So I'll hand back to Jackie just to talk about what the region's doing as we speak.
Yeah, so we know there's already a lot happening across the region, and a lot that local authorities are already driving forward. And this map just starts to pick out some of the main things that are happening. And we've built these, or WSP have built these into into the modelling already as part of the work that's happening as business as usual mostly. So we can see there's already a lot of ambition and a lot of engagement with a number of stakeholders. So councils are engaged and working hard on this, but also some of our larger businesses who we've spoken to as part of the work that we've taken forward here and as part of the stakeholder engagement. So if we could go to the next slide, Barney. Also, the Combined Authority has got a number of investments that are contributing to our work on climate change, be that around travel. So, for example, public transport and active travel. There is a regional retrofit programme that has the potential to create huge investment opportunities for the region, as well as helping to address some of the challenges around fuel poverty that I mentioned earlier on, and also around new builds. So we don't want to be building homes that are going to require retrofitting. So we've published the Zero Carbon Homes Charter. Energy Capital are doing some great work around bringing key stakeholders together around the region's energy transition. We have set up a circular economy task force, and we will have a route map to show some of the things we can do around resources. We're working with innovative businesses. So earlier this year we launched, late last year and into this year, we've launched a Green Innovation Challenge along with 5G to start to look at what we can do around green innovation. And we're also doing some work around natural capital, and we've brought that to previous Environment Board meetings. So, for example, the virtual forest, there's the Wildlife Ways programme in Solihull, and we're working with Birmingham City University on the West Midlands National Park. So we're not going from a standing start. There is already a lot happening and a lot of programmes planned. And I think it's important to recognise that this is building on some really good foundations, but we do know we need to start to accelerate this work, and Barney will talk through some of that as we go through. So I think I'm just going to talk you now through, oh no, sorry, there's one more slide. We're also working in a national context. So that is enabling some of the things and creating some of the conditions we need to address climate change. And we have to be aware of that context. We also know that some things could be going quicker and creating different conditions for us to be able to accelerate some of the things we know need to happen, be that devolution of powers or resources to make things go faster. And Councillor Zaffer talked about that, for example, in the context of retrofit. And this just outlines some of the policies that are coming on stream in the near future. Councillor Courts.
Okay, can I just clarify one thing that you've said, which is this is building on individual local authorities' work. And if you look across the board, I mean, there are several that are saying 2041, which basically links with CA. Obviously, Birmingham has an earlier target. I don't think the one that Coventry's got there, it mentions a date. But, you know, realistically, how much of the individual council contribution have you really taken account of? Because OK, we're pretty confident as we can do the council operations by 2030. I mean, we've done a lot anyway. The 2041, well, that leaves something, that's a different matter. And I would say the same is for Birmingham. So you can't assume that, well, there wouldn't be a problem, would there? If Birmingham had done 2030 and we'd done 2041, you've cracked it. But that's not true. So how much have you taken on board of what the councils are doing?
I'll let Barney answer that. How they built that into the model.
Yeah, okay, Barney. Yeah, I agree, Councillor. Of course, it's one of the major issues when you do big strategy pieces is you've often, of course, in one theory is you could just leave it to other people's targets to achieve the goal. So what we've done in this case is where we've got targets, for example, for councils to be zero carbon by 2030, for example, what we've done is we've assumed the council itself will be zero carbon, but the actual region which it represents won't be. Does that make sense?
Okay, well that's what I expected you to say, but I thought I'd better just clarify.
Yeah,
okay.
So we haven't just taken the target and assumed it, no.
No, Peter, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you again, Ian. Yes, that actually, thank you, Ian. Actually comes back to to my other question of here we have going up to 41, and I think it'll be earlier than that on the combined authority. I see the national government, and it's all about trying to buy. It's actually getting it nearer towards the bottom number than the top number. But is this draft, first of all, going to the constituent and non-constituents for comment? Because the one concern I have, I hear what you say, Barney, but your mind sort of thinks, right, we have a national, we have the combined authority, which all the local councils are in and part of. So how do we encourage those local authorities to aim for similar dates? Otherwise, I just think that we are potentially, or could be, out of sync. And I think I did see, Ian, on that map, that it's, I think it said Wolverhampton by 2028, for example. Oh, yes, there you go. And I know some things won't be totally all in sync. I do appreciate that, sort of Solihull with the airport, etc. But I always think that if we're in a team and working, hopefully the local authorities that look at this actual draft, etc., to come to, yes, we need to be aiming to those dates, and if we all can bring it down further, more's the better. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, I mean, this document is the 7 Mets. Fundamentally, I read somewhere it is the 7 Mets, but in fact, we are working very closely with the other councils as well, and we'd like to have it all, everybody brought in on this. I mean, this dates issue, I think, is really in some ways, it's very misleading because I think the report says why we're at 2041 and not at 2051. It's all about. We're at 2041, not 2050, which is what the government is. And it's partly because of certain things that the government's doing. I think it's carbon capture and stuff like that we haven't got in. So our targets are more ambitious than the government. But, even with some of these, even with the individual council targets, I think you'll find there's some offsetting involved. I mean, we've looked at ours, and the reality is, there will be a residual piece that we can't find an answer to at the moment, however much we'd like to. And it's the same in this, the WSP work, actually. Just before I hand over to Barbara, Jackie, do you want to comment any more?
I think that, and you'll see this as Barney starts to present the modelling. I think we would encourage, an accelerated approach wherever we can across the board. It's an urgent issue that we need to address. 2041 was the kind of science-based target, but I think we need to take the task in hand and make sure that we don't become too distracted by the dates, but more the need to work collectively to put the accelerated plan that you'll hear more about in place. And if conditions allow it, be that policy or financing, then absolutely we should look at how we can go faster with some of those things. But this paper has been written, or this piece of work has been done with what we know now and what is feasible to do now. But we'll review it. As I said, we'll review it as we go on.
We all should be doing quicker dates, but the reality is we could all pick 2035 if you then said, well, we're going to have to do a lot more offsets. Picking a date isn't the point. It's what's comprised in that. Barbara?
Just to say that Wolverhampton, the date is 2028 for council-run things, as far as I'm aware, like the fleet and buses and so on. But we are sticking to the same date as we're doing for everywhere else, just to clarify that.
Okay, thank you. Great. Right, we'll press on. Barney, you going to continue?
I think Jackie's just going to.
Yeah,
Jackie. Right.
I'm just going to whiz through these slides. So there's only 2 on stakeholder engagement. I mentioned at the start that engagement and consultation has been really important as part of the whole 2041 process. And that's that's been true of this plan as well. So you can see 240 individuals were engaged from 97 different organisations that included business organisations, environmental NGOs, local authorities, universities. So we spoke to a range of different stakeholders through the different routes that you can see there to find out what was most pressing for them. And if we move on to the next slide, you can see the summary of what they said. So we've already picked out, for example, the importance of behaviour change as part of the intervention. So we need to be thinking about how we roll some of our actions out as well as what we're doing. That, you know, there needs to be clear engagement and alignment between the types of courses, for example, that educational institutions are rolling out, and making sure that the employment is there for people. And we'll be talking a lot more about jobs and skills further down the presentation. In terms of delivery mechanisms, I think one of the key things to come out of this is understanding who needs to deliver what at what scale. I think that's really important for the effective delivery of the actions in the plan, and of course resourcing. So how are we going to access and finance and fund the different goals that are in the plan? And again, there's some more on that further down. So I'm handing back to you now, Barney, I think, to take us through all the modelling and analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Okay, everyone, so I hope some of this will hopefully address some of the questions that I sense have raised. So just to explain the way we undertook the work, we split the emissions and therefore the actions and goals into these 5 sectors around domestic, commercial, industrial, transport and large-scale land use, underpinned by system management, both in a physical sense and an organisational sense. So the result of that, in a quick summary, is these 15 goals, which I'll go through individually in a moment. So but I'll just flash them up now. In these 5 sectors where we're trying to deliver the CO2 emissions. To give some comparison of different options, appreciate this is a bit of a busy slide, so I'll explain it. We've created 3 scenarios, which are possible ways we could go with these different 15 goals. So there's the moderate delivery scenario, which we've set there, and essentially we've set for each goal a low, medium, high, and a very high target. And as you can see, for the moderate one, we've selected mostly lows and mediums, with 1 high. Now there is some logic behind all this analysis, but it's just a scenario. So you could pick a different scenario, and part of the point of this, our analysis, is it will enable you as individuals, if you want to do exactly that and change some of these assumptions. With the moderate goal, we won't achieve any of the goals we've set ourselves in terms of 2026 and 2041. There's the accelerated scenario, what we're calling the accelerated scenario, and as you can see, we picked different, more ambitious, more aggressive interventions for that, mostly along the lines of what we're calling the high assumption. This is the reference scenario. So everything I'm going to show you after this is based on this scenario, and that will deliver the 2041 target we need to meet, more or less, which I'll explain in a moment, but not in terms of the 2026 trajectory set out in the Tyndall report. And then finally, we set out a maximum, what we're calling a maximum scenario, and you can see that's mostly everything set to very high. Now, one of the real challenges when we work on these things is because we're not dealing with the laws of physics, you can do these things very, very fast. It is physically possible to do so. I think the maximum scenario we set out is, I would say, is very ambitious and does, I would say, have issues around legislative competence, funding, and simply the supply chain to deliver. But it is there, and it's explained in the report in terms of what it means. So it would then deliver broadly in line with the 2026 and 2041 target. Okay, please everyone put a hand up if anyone has questions or I'm not explaining it very well. So under the accelerated scenario, you get this sort of simplified version, and what I'll do is I won't stay on this very long because I'm going to take you through them one by one, but essentially for these sectors you've got different ambitions with different end goal lines, end dates for completion of the work. So So to take you through this one by one, and I'll start off just by explaining one in detail, and then you'll see that the principle follows through for all of them, so it's fairly easy to follow. What you've got is the goal, a brief description of what we're talking about. So in this case, it's domestic energy efficiency retrofit. So it's where relevant, it's the installation of these measures. And then just ignoring the graph for a moment, we're coming down to the table. What the table then shows you is the low, medium, high, and very high goal levels, and what they would deliver within the 5-year plan, so by the end of 2025, 2026. A lot of them continue on, so they're not stopping in 2026. It's just we're sticking to this 5-year plan. And then the graph above is the visual representation of that table, in a sense. So on the energy efficiency retrofit, for example, the reference scenario on the high is 294,000 dwellings retrofitted to a reasonable standard. And this would be the saving in CO2 emissions per annum by 2026. So again, I think. Can I just
draw attention to the line at the back, at the bottom? I mean.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
It's very interesting because what you're saying is heating retrofit. Yeah. I mean, heating retrofit. What? That's a new boiler, or probably not a gas boiler, but something different. Yeah. That's a very different animal to deal with than maybe an energy refit, which means knock you all down and put something more that less leaks, isn't it?
Yeah. So the line at the bottom shows you the relative proportion of contribution. So on this one, you've got the orange one is the energy efficiency, the grey one is the retrofit heating, which in this case is a heat pump as the assumption, and then the turquoise is the solar contribution. And yeah, it's important because you can see from this that in the reducing CO2 emissions, just very quickly visually, solar is going to be a lot less important than heating retrofit. Yeah. It might be a lot easier than the heating retrofit as well. So but it just shows you the relative contribution on this sort of line, and this will be the same for all the goals. So a point I would emphasise on this, and I won't do it for all 15 goals because you'll get bored, but I think I would emphasise that how much of a step change this is. Just to, we are retrofitting nowhere near this number of dwellings at the rate we need to at the moment to that standard. And coming on to this second one, which is heating retrofit, so the same principles, talking about retrofitting low carbon heat pumps into domestic buildings. This is about, I think it's just under a quarter of dwellings. It would be the high scenario by 2026. Now that's conceivable because the replacement rate of heating systems would naturally allow for that. But we would have to essentially do 100% of that replacement. And to quickly put it in perspective, that's about 60,000 a year, 50,000 a year during the 5-year plan. The whole of the UK at the moment is installing 20,000 systems a year. So what I don't want anyone to take the impression that these high targets are sort of easy or they'll just happen. They genuinely do require a step change in how we're delivering. So this is the heating retrofit, and and again, it's a very big proportion of the challenge, and you can see that's why you get greater savings on impact. But of course, it's probably more challenging to deliver as well. And then the same for domestic. You've got solar PV, of course. A good proportion of homes have roofs which could have solar panels on them, and many do already. And so we've estimated the proportion there of what contribution that can deliver and the different scenarios. Okay, I'll move on to the commercial sector, and the commercial is pretty much exactly the same principle. So this is heavy industry. This is just sort of commercial and perhaps light industry, but again, exactly the same principles. What we've taken is energy efficiency, heating retrofit, so fundamentally changing from gas to low carbon heat sources. In this case, electric. It could be hydrogen in the future, but that's not available at the moment. And again, rooftop solar. So in each case, we've given different scenarios, and these goals have been set in line with logical data that's available, things like the Committee on Climate Change and these kind of things. And so these are the relative. But it's good, again, just helps the visual down the bottom there. You can see less significant than the domestic sector by quite a way. So I can see at least a couple of hands have gone up. I can't. There's Matthew Rhodes is one of them.
Okay. Peter, Matthew, start.
Okay, right. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't first. It was Councillor Fowler, but I just wanted to pick up on something you said, Barney, about some of these things are easier than others, and it's an observation really that it seems to me that these goals combine three different types of activity. There's some things over which the region has no control whatsoever and never will, like the decarbonisation of the electricity grid, or carbon capture and storage. That there are some things in there which are really helpful in visualising this all happening, like how many buildings will have heat pumps in, or solar PV. But those kind of areas they have potential to the economics can change very, very quickly based on global developments, technical developments, or the cost of silicon or whatever, and they can change very quickly with national policies which might put incentives in place to do these things. So we have some control, but not necessarily that much, particularly when you think about solar or something where you've got 2 million households you're going to have to persuade to do it. That could be really expensive, although the technology is really difficult. And then there's a third category of thing, which a lot of the transport stuff comes in, for example, or the building regulations, where actually local authorities have a high degree of control and they can really do stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess my kind of observation stroke thought is, if we're going to ask for resources to make our contribution to addressing climate change in this region, it would help to kind of inform these goals and things with those where a bit more resource for the West Midlands or Birmingham City Council or the appropriate level really would actually make the biggest difference. And that was kind of implicit in my point as well. If you start to think about local building regulations or planning rules, we know where they sit, so we know where the extra resource would make a difference. Similarly, transport, again, we know where that sits already within the region. It's just, at some point, we've got to get into that level of detail, and it frustrates me a bit sometimes when we go off down things we can all relate to, like solar PV on roofs, when actually the biggest area where local authority can make a difference might be something that's a little bit more esoteric, like building regulations or infrastructure planning.
Yeah. Absolutely right, Matt, because I was having a discussion with Ed and Jackie about what I call a currency of energy reduction, and that's why I fastened on the bar at the bottom, because you look at the other thing you add into that is how much would you need to spend, or what would be the investment required into one of these, and would actually be better not to bother and do something else, and what things are easier and what can be influenced by regulation, like building regulations. I mean, building regulations, I thought something had happened recently with energy standards in building regulations, and which has helped, but there needs to be a linkage with that, doesn't there? I mean, if you want an extension built, well, you could apply money into that.
Yes.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair, and Barney, Jackie, pardon my ignorance on this question. First of all, on the retrofit, so pleased to see those words, replacement of fossil fuel boilers. And of course, your mind then sees offices and etc. In lots of offices, etc. You are probably seeing, and certainly in houses, you're probably seeing a lot of radiators, etc. all around the house. But I have seen in places where you've had grills where it's saying that it's through heat, it's coming through those vents. So is it possibly replacing things like radiators to a different system? And pardon my ignorance on that.
Yeah, so maybe to answer your point first, Councillor Fowler. No, I mean, no. So the answer is it can involve changing of emitters, but it doesn't necessarily need to. So you can use heat pumps or hydrogen boilers if they become available with radiators, or you can use them with warm air systems or underfloor systems or a lot of different systems. So it can require that, but it cannot as well. But there's plenty of heat pump systems just using radiators. And then I think, Matthew, there's quite a lot in there you were talking about. I think we will come on to the delivery plans in a moment, which do try and bring to life a bit that how are we going to do this. I think the report acknowledges, and the slides acknowledge, the combined authority and the local authorities and the whole region definitely won't be able to do everything themselves. And in some ways, there is an element of just pointing out where there's gaps as well. And you know, we don't apologise for that, but we'd acknowledge it as a point. It's a fair point.
Okay. Shall we press on?
Yes, by all means, yeah. So then, in terms of the industrial sector is the most challenging, I would say, for a number of reasons. Not least because a lot of what we're looking for in terms of industrial decarbonisation is, as Matthew was saying, is dependent on things like carbon capture and storage, which we've illustrated here, and the uptake of potentially of hydrogen or maybe electric for some high temperature processes, which their trajectory is uncertain, dependent on national decisions, if not international decisions, and so it was a challenge. But we've taken some data from BEIS, some data from Committee on Climate Change, and set out these goals, which suggest a reasonable progression in terms of energy efficiency, clean hydrogen, and carbon capture and storage. And is it Matthew Rhodes has got his hand up again, or is that?
Yeah, sorry, I just want to count on specifically on industry, because I thought the report as a whole was, you know, great, covered all the ground, everything else, but the one area where I was really quite worried was industrial, because I'm not sure, and I'd be happy for you to put me right, that you've accounted for the costs to industry. So the reality is, if I look at, I'm familiar with black country industry, 75% of the energy use of black country industry is gas. It's not electricity. You decarbonise electricity. You can't replace the gas with electricity without increasing the cost by a factor of 3 of your industrial processes, and therefore you put businesses out of business. And I'm not sure where you cover that issue in this report, and I'm worried you're kind of glossing over it, and that will potentially that's a big thing to gloss over, because there's a lot of jobs, a lot of businesses.
It's a point taken, and we will make a note and perhaps strengthen our point on that. I think we are. I take your point. This is why we didn't assume stronger goals. These are things that are set out in the Committee for Climate Change reports in terms of scenarios, so they're fairly aligned with the national. But I agree with you. You can't do these things without. This is the problem. If one major industrial business does this, they will be uncompetitive on the national, international stage. And therefore, that's why I was saying action probably needs to be national, if not international, in terms of agreements. So, I'll take the point, and we will emphasise that it's not. I agree, it's difficult.
Okay, Andy, Mac.
Thank you for that. As a chemical engineer who's worked for Courtaulds, I think what industry requires is a clear framework. And given time, industry will adapt, but it's the time that's required. It's a rate of change that affects a business, not where the destination is. Now, I remember the challenges we had at Courtaulds. We had the CFC refrigerant gases. We had, we had a lead-in of 6 years to do it. We did it. In our products, if the customer wanted a fibre that had a certain ecological framework and there was guaranteed sales, we would adapt. This is a question. The lead the CA ought to take is actually, if you make the market, industry will go to it. If you impose taxes and tariffs on industry, you'll close it down. So it's a question of, letting, the thing grow. And whilst I'm at it, my favourite thing, inclusive growth. My concern about the UN metrics is that they don't allow for GDP growth. And I'm convinced that the only way we're going to improve the situation is to have industrial growth. So this needs to be closely aligned with our industrial strategy as well. So we need to, make sure that if we're going to have the gigafactory in the West Midlands, we need to make sure we set the framework so it can be ready for the future and create the business. So don't disagree with what you're saying about this, but the question is, it's not about putting businesses out of business, therefore we can't move. It's actually giving them a roadmap over 10 years, and this is where it will be, and provide the hydrogen infrastructure which we need in the West Midlands. We've got foundries, we've got furnaces, we're a core engineering hub that requires heat and the melting of metal. Fundamental in the West Midlands. We need to melt metal. You can't melt metal effectively with electricity without building a power station on that site. You need to have the gas and the hydrogen. So It's about the infrastructure. So it's a balance about goal setting and providing the infrastructure, and then things will happen. That's all I'm going to say.
It's quite a point, Andy, about making an adjustment, time to adjust, particularly, I mean, the one that you happen to have on the screen is goal 7. I mean, you've got hydrogen there as quite a very tall graph, and hydrogen industry is not exactly highly developed. And this is a 5-year plan. I mean, you know, it's not, is there any happening at this moment? I mean, is anything happening on that at the moment? So, you know, is this feasible, actually, this orange one, you wonder?
Yeah, just so I answer some of those points. Andy, I agree with your points, and we'll make that point. I think this is back to Matthew's point: is that certainly hydrogen. It's not even the hydrogen infrastructure; it's the hydrogen itself, which won't be a West Midlands exclusive thing. There is some action happening in terms of hydrogen. We're working on the HyNet project up near the northwest of England and into Wales, where there is industrial hydrogen being used and then fed into systems. But there's not enough anywhere near. Also, the government's 10-point plan announced just before Christmas does include a specific commitment. I think it's to 5 gigawatts of hydrogen generation capacity this decade. I think.
Okay. Do you want to press on, because time's roaring on?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Okay. And then just coming on to the transport sector, I think this probably has three elements to the transport goals. There's the avoiding unnecessary travel, which in most ways is a positive sense of not having to do journeys. And of course, we're going through a very strange period in terms of things like home working at the moment. But so we've looked at the opportunity that can deliver. Then we're talking about shifting travel. So this is essentially moving from private cars to bikes, walking, public transport. And then I'll move on, but I can always come back if anyone wants more time on these graphs. And then essentially what you're talking about then is the electrification or other fuels of...
Sorry, you flicked over from... Can we go back to goal 9? I've been talking with businesses across Solihull. I try and speak to 1 or 2 a week just to talk about, what they're doing. And one of the things I've been trying to get a handle on is office occupancy. Offices, we're not going to need them anymore. All that's rubbish, of course. And what's becoming clear to me is between office population, in other words, the amount of time people need to be in offices, I reckon between 20 and 50% it could reduce. And, because we're doing this. And I don't know how far you've factored that in, but you've actually reduction in travel for retail 25%. And you say you're excluding commuting. So just comment on what I've said in terms of if we do see a reduction in, commuting, really.
Yeah. So the way what we did for this goal was we looked at the ONS data on what they think fundamentally work that can be done from home, because it's we're in a very, very tricky period to do this analysis in, because we're probably going through a huge change, like a sort of once in a lifetime change, but we don't know what the end of that is. So we used ONS data for jobs that could be predominantly done at home, because some of us will probably work from home forever now, but others will be desperate to get back to places where we can be more productive and need to. So we use the ONS data from that. We also then use some academic data in terms of how frequently people could be working from home, and in terms of journeys about and the change in retail and business, which again, we're actually going through a major change in that as well. So we've used that data in terms of how we often don't go to the shops, we get stuff delivered. So the detail is actually in the longer report, so for those who are interested. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and then the last one is the electrification of fleets, fundamentally at the moment, or possibly different fuels or opportunities in the longer term as well. And I think someone was mentioning before, I think what you'll find with some of these goals is we're going to have to do things that will just not happen if we don't do them. And in some of them, I think we're talking about accelerating a trend that will happen. So, so road vehicles will electrify eventually, even if we don't do anything. But what the programme here is more about accelerating that process. And then the last two goals are 14 is this was looking at wind turbines and ground mount solar, so large solar farms that you'd have seen. And so we used the GIS analysis, which is explained in a bit more detail in the report with some maps and so on, about where you could deploy those profitably or well. in terms of making sure it's on low-grade agricultural land, there's good wind speed, that kind of thing. And so these are the capacities you can see. So small but significant. And then natural capital, in this case, we've narrowly calculated this, although acknowledging the point there's a much wider story to it. This is around tree planting, and so the goals set here are based on, so this is the virtual forest as the low, that's our sort of starting point because we're already committed to that, and the high which we've taken is broadly as close as we could get to what the Committee on Climate Change are recommending in terms of forest cover. And just for those not in the lingo, the peri-urban areas, what that means is essentially street tree planting, or or public squares, that kind of thing. So much lower density than forestry, but still making a significant contribution.
Barney, trees don't seem to do very much on that scale then, do they?
No, well, it's
Maybe we should go and plant a load in South America instead, where they've got, or wherever they've got land where we could do it on a massive scale and more cheaply.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I don't know if you're being entirely serious there. I think there's 2 points. There is a point about whether something outside the region would count. So it is literally a political discussion, I would say there. I think the second point is the reason it doesn't provide as much by 2026 is because, of course, trees, the planting will accelerate and then they grow. So they start off a bit slower. But thirdly, and it comes back to the point around the other things, of course, part of the reason it's good to have trees in urban areas is because people like trees in urban areas. If you look at a street with trees on it, it'll be more expensive than a street without trees. And people like, so it was picking up on the point, feedback from our public consultation, that people were saying it's not just a brutal carbon exercise. There's potential to make our West Midlands a better place. Anyway, that was the logic.
Okay. The tree things need talking up because it's part of the planning, now at the moment anyway,
yeah.
Tree lined streets. And I wasn't being completely unserious about it because, if trees had a big importance, okay, we should do a lot own for pollution and the rest of it. But there are parts of the world where actually they can't afford to plant trees, but probably would, with help. So I don't think it's necessarily, indeed, I know one developer, he's taken the view that he can't be a completely carbon neutral because building is an expensive operation. So he's collaborating with, to do it in rainforesty areas. So anyway, I've got Peter.
Oh, just a quickie, Chair, on trees. I don't know whether anybody had the opportunity to watch the programme with Sir David Attenborough on Planets yesterday, on his programme on humans and what it's doing to the planet. But he was showing film of different countries, the rainforest and etc., where trees have been taken away, but they're now showing different ways of replanting. And it really was a good programme. So if anybody didn't get the chance to watch that yesterday, I really recommend watching it. It was fantastic.
Okay, good. Okay, is it back to you, Jackie?
Not quite yet.
Oh, sorry, I thought you'd hand it back. Fine, on you go, Barney. I don't want to steal your thunder.
No, it's fine. So an important point, and it's been raised, I think, a couple of times already, is the cost on this. And what I'm going to try and just explain. So there's a big model that sits behind all this, and we've crunched numbers in loads of different ways. And this is what I'm showing on the screen, except for the text, is what's called a marginal abatement cost curve. And this is a way to try and capture in one graph the points people were making about what I think point you've made, Councillor Court, about what you get, the pounds per spent per unit of greenhouse gas emission savings, and this illustrates it. So what I'm going to say, you can see on the Mac most of the goals. There are some missing because they couldn't be priced accurately, but you've got 12 goals there. And what the Mac does is it shows you we're starting here and we want to be over here on the far right, so that's where we're going. And what it shows you is that it starts us off with the most cost-effective measure you can do, and it finishes off with the least cost-effective measure you can do. So the most cost-effective measure we have calculated here is commercial microgeneration, basically rooftop solar and commercial property. But its contribution going from left to right is quite small, so that's how you show that. And then you get, again, so the next one is industrial microgeneration, which again is cost-effective, but very small because there's not limited opportunity. And you simply go on like that. And what we're estimating is when the the goals are below this zero line on the x-axis, they pay back. So, for example, commercial solar will pay back during its life. You will get a return on your investment. When it's above the zero line, you won't get all your money back. There might be a saving, but it's not enough. So it's a good way of visualising both the impact of the measures, their cost effectiveness, and so on. I don't know if
Barney, it is, but the colours, unless, I mean, I've just blown it up on the screen and it's slightly easier, but I wish there was a way of just making it clearer, because it's a very important slide, but you got blues in different places. I don't know whether anything could be done for that for other consumption.
Yeah, sorry, I think our graphics team are going to do the whole of this,
Okay.
report. So I'll make a note. I agree. It'll also, I think what we'll make sure is it's bigger, so it has its own page, if you like, because that will help significantly.
But numbers on it, for instance, because I mean, you've got these all have numbers in other places, don't they? So I just wonder whether there's some means of actually the big blue square, blue rectangle, for instance. I'm not even sure what that is. What is that? Is that domestic heat pumps?
This one here is commercial energy efficiency. So.
Right, but there's another one, isn't there?
I take your point. There's probably too many shades of blue on this.
I think actually I've got a slide with different colours. I wonder whether it's changed in the production. Okay, anyway, I've made a point, so that's fine.
Okay. Obviously, I'll come back to this if anyone wants to discuss it at the end. And then just in really crude terms, this is the scale of the investment we're talking about to 2026. Just, you can see we're talking, I think it's come to 4.9 billion, numbers to be checked. But these are estimates. I think that's completely gross. So that's not showing any net saving. And it's also not taking account of the fact that, of course, some of these things will be delivered by organisations or the public themselves in different ways. Things like solar PV, people will put solar on their roof, even if we don't do anything. I think Ed Cox has got his hand up.
Yeah, he has. I was going to say that's quite a big if, that one, showing them gross, it's quite a big point, that is. Ed?
Well, I was just literally wanting to come in to make sure that this point was made really loud and clear, that the 4.7 billion or 4.9 billion or whatever it completely adds up to is not the amount of money that the West Midlands Combined Authority itself needs to invest. I think our role is a facilitative one. The report tells us that this is the amount that will need to be invested. But going back to the previous slide with the MAC curve, some of that, particularly that which has a payback on it, one would expect that there may be commercial ways in which that finance can be raised and invested. But to the right-hand side, the grey, brown and other blue squares, that's where the public help is going to need to be focused, if you like. There may be some market stimulation on the left-hand side, but on the right-hand side, it's where we really are going to need the public to help. And as I say, that won't just be combined authority. I think government needs to do a lot of the heavy lifting here as well.
Okay.
I simply wanted to emphasise that point.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, agreed. And then so to summarise all that in some nice simple graphs, this is what the accelerated scenario shows us to achieve in 2041. So the current situation is the black bar. So as I said, I think it's just about 11 megatons, and then these are the contributions from the different sectors. The orange, as we drop down to 2041, where we're showing, I think it's about 95% reduction. And I just emphasize the point, we could have twiddled around with the numbers to make sure we got to exactly 100%, but I think the point is what we're saying is we can be fairly confident we'll be in that region. And I think what we've also done throughout the project is taken a reasonably conservative approach generally, but also what we haven't taken into account is any benefits from, for example, the improvement in performance of technology over that 20-year period. So, heat pumps will get better, electric vehicles will get more efficient, solar will get more powerful, and so on. So that gap is probably bridgeable. So that's the good news for 2041. Then on 2026, of course, for the next 5 years, we've got a much smaller reduction. It's about 25%, but the same principles. So to show that on the graphs, this graph on the right shows you the black line is the Tyndall trajectory as suggested. the black one, and then you've got the 3 different scenarios we've run through today, and essentially the trajectory they would give you. But that's clear. Okay.
Okay.
Come back to that, and then again, sorry, this is just a nice simple summary of what we're talking about in words rather than by 2026. So.
Okay.
Jackie, do you want to take us through this slide, or is that like again? So this is essentially just showing the same.
Yeah. So there's a lot of detail in here, but what we wanted to show really was the total deployment for net zero. So that's out to 2041. The current position, and then where the accelerated scenario that WSP are recommending would take us to. So it's just really a read across for what we need, where we are, and then what we need for the next 5 years, just to summarise all the charts that you've just been taken through.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. And then I think, as been mentioned before, I think it was Matthew who was making the point about, the West Midlands Combined Authority can't do all of this, and I think it's more broadly stated that the Combined Authority has 3 areas. So it delivers some things, it enables other things, and it influences other things. And I think this is the point, is these 15 goals and other things that we need to achieve will probably fall into under these broad headings for the Combined Authority, and it will take a different role and have to work with others. Even where it's delivering, I think it'll have to work with others. So, I appreciate this is quite small. It's difficult to make this easy to read in a slide deck, and it's in the longer report, which you'll also see very soon. What we've tried to do is break down the 5 areas: domestic, commercial, industrial, transport, and land use into its 2 areas, and then look at the lead role, how it's going to be delivered, the investment resources required, the stakeholders that will be required to be part of that work, how the local authorities collaborate on that, and then the immediate next steps on some of these things. Because as I think has been hinted at in some ways, some of this it's easy to tell you what you need to do. It's a lot harder to do it, and so we accept that, and there needs to be some pretty solid business plans and analysis on those individual programs and how we deliver them. I don't know if anyone had a chance to read it and they want to ask questions now, I can answer them, or we can move on. I think Jackie, you're just going to talk about some of these cross-cutting things, because one of the points we've been seeing throughout the programme is there are lots of things that will have a positive effect across the board, in terms of, a bit like you were saying, Matthew, on building regulation, for example. That could cut across quite a few themes and be undertaken. So, Jackie, if I move to this slide, just to talk about cross-cutting, is that okay?
Yeah, so I want to make sure we leave enough time for the jobs and skills part, but as I mentioned in the initial slides, there are a lot of things that will need to be put in place to enable the goals to be achieved, and some of the programs of work we need to put in place. And these are some of the things that we've started to work on now. So we have developed a West Midlands net zero business pledge, along with some of the businesses that are located in the West Midlands, and we'll be launching that hopefully in March. We're looking to build a carbon literacy programme so that our own staff understand what we're trying to do through this plan, because not only does it need to work with stakeholders across the region, but it needs to be something that flows through delivery of much of what we do and other organisations do. Communications and behaviour change has been picked up on already, and we are just in the process of beginning some further work around communications and behaviour change. So to really understand what are a couple of the key programmes initially that we could be rolling forward with, and how do we communicate some of the complex issues that are falling out of this piece of work, and obviously understanding the wider initiatives around financing too. So we know that there are things that need to cut across all of it and that will enable all of it. So if we could go to the next slide. one of the things, and this is a very busy slide, but one of the things that we know we need to do is think about how we structure the whole process and the governance around it to make sure that we aren't operating in silos. So, you know, there is a lot of work in the 3 key areas you see there that Energy Capital are doing, that the Environment team are doing, and that Transport for the West Midlands are doing, that overlap, and there are dependencies between some of those different bits of work. So what we intend to do is to set up a net zero delivery board to cut across those different areas, and to work with the spatial planning, for example, that the local authorities are doing and the local delivery, as well as to roll out some of those cross-cutting initiatives. So behaviour change, the net zero business pledge. And we need to work as well really effectively with local delivery stakeholders, whether that's LEPs, businesses, third sector organisations and our educational institutions. And what we've acknowledged at the bottom is the governance that's already in place. So, for example, the Energy Capital Board, and then Energy Capital and the Environment team feed into this Environment Energy Board, and Transport for West Midlands has the Strategic Transport Board. So being very clear on the routes to governance to oversee this work and to monitor progress, which takes me on to the next slide, that just builds on what we need to do to make sure that we are keeping to the progress that we need to make around carbon reduction, that we're collecting the right data that shows how we're progressing. So just really to review it, it's going to be an iterative process, particularly as we start to scale up delivery. So this is just to make sure that we're keeping to task.
I think we've got a couple of questions just
yeah,
before.
we do.
Matthew?
Two quick points on the organisational or the governance chart. Really. One was industrial decarbonisation is featured a couple of times and is on that slide, and you've got the LEPs on there, but I think possibly, related to the point I made previously, strategic economic development, the local industrial strategy, the impact all of this has on that is quite a big bit of it. So we need to make sure that's properly reflected. And it is at the moment in the governance structure. So I think it. Well, sorry, that made my point. The other thing that strikes me about this, and I hope it's not intentional, but you know, I just worry a little bit about kind of public sector and local authority comfort zones and lots of plans and strategies, which is necessary, but not sufficient, because we've actually got to make stuff happen. And there's an operational element to this, to me as well. So Energy Capital's got the infrastructure companies on it, the Western Powers and Cadence, and we've got to work with them to actually make sure that they do what we need to support everything. And so I think the kind of making it happen bit, just wanted to make sure that was in there as well.
Yeah, and I think that in the longer form version of the report, that is where that comes through the delivery plans. So that is definitely within the context of the longer report, and obviously what we managed to put in here is just a very high level summary, but that goes in there.
Okay, I think what we need is the first item on delivery board's agenda needs to be a number as to how far we've got. You know, number count these things. That's the way of delivering it. I've got Peter and then Andy. I must go a minute before 4, so that's how much time we've got. So, Peter?
Yeah, be very quick, Chair. Thank you. Just coming from the point of transport, where we've looked at working from home on things like Teams and all that, and we see the development of electric vehicles such as buses. We've got metro, but I think there are some gaps that may be being worked on now, such as the increase in park and ride. This is about connectivity. So even with electric cars coming on board, it's making to ensure combined authority wide that where there are gaps in transport links, those will help. So it gives people the opportunity where they've been used to travelling in their car, because there's no transport facility around them. It's identified so they can say, oh, right, I don't need now to go in my car like I used to, because these other facilities are in place, so I can either get on the bus, on the metro, go to the park and ride, and then travel by whatever means. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. And some of that is behavioural as well. You know, people often don't get on buses because they don't either know where they are or where they go or the time taken. Andy?
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My concern, and I think there's only 2 slides in the whole, well, 2 slides or 2 parts, 2 pages of the presentation that are probably important. Is actually, what do we need to do? We've glossed over that, and we spent a lot talking about strategy, governance, thing, and we've got to realise that we're in the actual baseline or the basis of this work is changing every 6 months as new technology comes forward, new government policy comes forward, and I just feel like we need to shift away from process into delivery. And there's one item in the previous slide, 100% taxis within the region, but in 5 years' time. We need to spend at next meeting discussing how we're going to achieve that, because that's not easy to do without a structured governance and a structured timeline for it. So we tell taxis that by 2026 they can't have petrol or diesel cars, and that's a difficult ask. And so I think we need, rather than having a holistic strategy, we need to have specific strategies or specific action points in the 5-year plan. I feel quite strongly about this. I don't think we'll meet the 2026 plans without a plan, and a strategy is not a plan.
Bite-sized chunks even. Ed, you're going to answer that.
Yeah, I am, because I think what we need to get into context is what this has achieved for us. A year ago, we set out the ambition for 2041. We got, in June last year, we put in place about 12 different work streams, and Jackie and the team are working really hard on those, whether that's the virtual forest, etc., etc. But the criticism we had at that point was we're just doing random activity about random things, and we don't really know where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck. So what we've done now with WSP is put into place a really carefully structured and costed program, which is what you've got in front of you, which now tells us where we will get the biggest bang for our buck, where we should be dedicating our biggest activities. If we just run off and done delivery plans with taxi fleets, we'll get accused again of, well, great, but are taxi fleets really the thing you need to be focusing on, or is it something else? What we can say now with real certainty is that retrofit, etc., they all have their place in the overall plan, but we can dedicate the limited resources that we've got on the things that are going to have the biggest impact. And that, I think, is the biggest achievement of this particular report, is that we can now do that. And you're absolutely right, Councillor Makovic, we can now do the delivery plans, and we've already got some outline delivery plans in this report. We can now do the delivery plans against them, but we can be confident that the delivery that we're doing is where we most need to invest our time and effort.
Okay, noted. Right, skills is jobs and skills, Jackie.
I think I'm handing over to Jim Coleman now from WSP.
You are, thank
Jim,
you.
I can't see you on the screen, but I'm sure you're there somewhere.
I'm here,
yes, now
I'm here, I'm waving. Okay, yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll try and do this very, very quickly. So we've started off in terms of thinking about jobs and skills. It's a hugely important area, because a lot of people's jobs will be affected by this process, and the process will create new jobs, it will change people's existing jobs, and it may remove jobs from the economy. So the first thing we looked at is how many people might possibly be affected by these various transitions that we're going to go through, just to get a sense of scale. So we know, for example, that there are 170,000 people working in industry, 116,000 in transport, 17,000 in specialized energy, 74,000 in construction. Huge numbers of people, big chunks of the current regional labour market, which will undergo some kind of change. And the challenge is, of course, to make sure the people who are currently in those jobs can change as the job changes, as the job transitions, because the transition is a very important part of the whole process, as Jackie said initially. There's going to be a big emphasis on how the education sector responds, and the region has control over its own adult education budget, which means it can help to shape adult education, and the further education sector is going to have to be will be very important, and will have to adapt and be flexible in what it delivers over this period. We'll see significant change, for example, in a lot of the occupations which are maybe low to medium skill. Those jobs currently undertaken will change into something else. A lot of the new jobs which come along through the decarbonisation processes, the net zero process, are probably going to be higher level jobs requiring higher level qualifications. So again, an emphasis on the education sector being able to respond to those needs. Let's have the next slide, Barney. We've looked at green skills, low carbon skills, how those skills are going to emerge out of the net zero process. It's quite a complex area. There are no really kind of hard and fast definitions or rules around what is a green skill, what is a low carbon skill, what is a green job, what is a low carbon job. A little bit like the technology. These things are evolving all the time, and we've had to kind of take a view in terms of the broad areas where new types of jobs and new types of skills needs might emerge, and they include things like low carbon electricity, low carbon heat, alternative fuel, energy efficient products, low carbon services, low emission vehicles and infrastructure. They're all going to generate their own, if you like, portfolios of job tasks and different qualifications that need to run alongside those. There are certain types of sectors which we know are hugely important to the West Midlands economy and have historically been very important, such as the automotive sector. And because of its role in net zero and decarbonisation, that sector is going to change a lot. And therefore, the current workforce is going to have to change alongside that. We need to retain people in jobs in this industry as it transitions, as it moves. Obviously, a lot of that is around electrification, moving to electric vehicles, but there will be quite a lot of specialised types of functions that are going to run alongside that. So development of new batteries, for example, the siting of gigafactories, other types of maintenance, construction, repair, etc., running alongside that as well. Next slide, please. I'm trying to do this very quickly in the last few minutes. Next one, Barney. So we've gone through all of the, back, too fast. We've gone through, we're going too quickly now. We've gone through all of the different interventions that the team have identified for the first 5 years of getting to net zero. And we have kind of, as far as we can, unpacked those interventions into the different types of jobs, the different types of skills needs, which are going to be relevant. It's easier to do that with some types of interventions than others. As we've been discussing, some of the interventions are probably liable to quite quick ongoing technology change, even in the next 5 years. So the jobs that appear out of those sectors are still a little bit difficult to quantify, but some of them are easier to quantify. So if we look through the different goals, the different interventions in energy efficiency, we know we're going to have retrofit coordinators, installers, designers. Of course, we know we're going to have heat pump installers. That's going to be a big chunk of the decarbonising workforce. Actually, solar PV installers, it's already part of the workforce, but it's going to have to become more significant. There are a lot of quite high-level skills, digital skills in different types of jobs, hydrogen-related skills, electric vehicle manufacturer, charging infrastructure, design, installation, maintenance. We've basically gone through all of the different interventions and tried to deconstruct them into different job types, into different skill types, in order to get a sense of the numbers, which are on the next slide. Barney. Oh, no, actually, no, go ahead. Go one before. Actually, yes, as well as jobs being created, the other thing to bear in mind is that some jobs may, of course, disappear. Things like gas boiler maintenance, as we move to air source heat pumps as the main heating source for houses. Of course, the old gas boilers will start to disappear. Now, these jobs won't disappear overnight. It will be a fairly long process. But one of the things we need to think about is how we transition people out of the part of the construction sector and maintenance sector that's declining and into that part of the sector which is expanding, which means that we need to think about new qualifications, transition-related skills. We need to make sure people are not dropping out of the labour market because their job has changed beyond recognition. We need to make sure people are staying in. So it's not just a case of identifying the technical skill need, it's also that transition pathway that individuals need to take to make sure they're staying in the labour market as the nature of the job changes. On to the next slide, please, Barney. So looking at the modelling that we've done across all of the different intervention areas to take us towards 2041 in the first 5 years, and in fact all the way to 2041, we've looked at the quantification of jobs, the types of jobs that might appear and how many might appear, and to some extent when they might appear as well. And from this type of analysis, we can see that we'll probably see quite significant numbers of jobs related to electric vehicles. That's in design, manufacture, it's in electric vehicle infrastructure, installation, maintenance, and a whole range of services that are going to run alongside that. We'll also expect to see a lot of jobs coming out of the whole retrofitting of buildings process, both on the domestic side and to some extent on the commercial side, around energy efficiency, a lot of jobs around heat, the decarbonisation of heat and moving to low carbon heating type processes, etc. As I said earlier, some of the jobs are easier to quantify than others. We've been very conservative with some of the things, for example, around demand reduction and people travelling less because of changes in technology and changing work patterns. Very difficult to quantify. And there'll be some interesting dynamics around those changing work profiles. It's not just losing jobs in kind of diesel related vehicles, for example. It's also in jobs maybe in some city centre services, which were really all about servicing the needs of people commuting into a city centre 5 days a week. If that doesn't continue the way we thought it would.
Jim, I'm running out of time.
Yes, sorry.
Ed, if you wish to just think of the last few minutes, but I really must go in a minute. So can I haven't got any hands up. I'm assuming that's a legacy hand, Andy. Any issues people want to raise, you can put them in the chat bar. Any final points, Jackie? Because I'm sorry about this, but
no, I was just putting it in the chat. We're really happy to take further written feedback. So I was actually putting my email and Richard's email addresses in the chat. And for local authorities, we have directed the low carbon officers to the streaming of this presentation. And we've arranged a drop-in session for Wednesday afternoon for people to come and provide us with further feedback if there is any. So there are other routes. I'll just finish dropping that in the chat if there are any additional points that people would like to raise or bring forward.
Okay, can I suggest I have to check out, but others don't. So if there are any issues to raise, sorry about this, but as I say, I'm log jammed today. So what I do want to just say is thank you very much, team, for this presentation. We're it's taken us a long way forward, and there's a lot of very interesting, important detail that's come out of this. I don't see any other hands up, actually. And on that basis, I'm going to, okay, if I leave Jackie at this point, I'll hand over to you and Ed just to finish off, if I may. Thank you, everyone, for making this contribution, and I hope you found it useful.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Court.